Hello, Willowbrook family. Congratulations, you have finished Romans. Today we are starting a new book, 1 Corinthians. You know what? As I get older, my eyesight gets older as well, especially when I try to see something very small. There are two things that help correct this. First, having enough light on the subject, and second, having a strong enough lens to see through. Now, I'll admit, this makes me feel old having to use one of these, but wow, look how huge everything is and how clear it is. I kind of feel like Sherlock Holmes using this. More about this in a minute. So before we look at chapter 1 of 1 Corinthians, let me give you some background. This book was written by Paul to a church community that he knew well. Corinth was a major city in the ancient world. It had a major port. It was a large economic power, and it had many temples to Greek and Roman gods. So Paul arrived there as a missionary, where he lived a year and a half there, and he met all types of people and introduced them to Jesus. And then together, they established the church in Corinth. So, after a while, Paul moved on to start other churches in other cities. Well, as time went by, Paul started to receive news that things in the church at Corinth weren't going too well. And there were some huge problems. And this is why Paul wrote the book of 1 Corinthians. Throughout this book, Paul addresses major issues, but he does it in a twofold way. First, he shines the light on the problem. And then second, he always responds to that problem through the lens of the gospel, the good news of Jesus. So this book is about how to think through every major area of your life through the lens of the gospel. And Paul uses this twofold method all throughout the entire book. So, now on to chapter 1. The first thing Paul does is he shines a light on the problem. And we begin to see that there are many divisions within the church. You see, after Paul left, there were some other teachers who came through Corinth, a man named Apollos, and probably Peter himself. And the members of the church had picked their favorite teacher and formed little cliques around that teacher. And not only did they do that, but then they started to talk badly about the other groups who favored other leaders. I mean, there was a Paul group and an Apollos group and a Peter group, and there was even a Jesus group. Now, when you first read this, it's easy to see that having groups around Paul and Apollos and Peter, they are not good. But how could you complain about a Jesus group? Well, more than likely, this group was probably known as the super spiritual group. You see, the Jesus group professed no loyalty to any church member and church leader other than themselves, and they appeared to have regarded themselves as the most spiritual element in the church. And the problem is that they have devised their own brand of spiritual elitism, and they were above everyone else, and that made them no better than the others. So, Paul first shines a light on the problem, and now he responds to the problem through the lens of the gospel. Paul first shows his supporters how foolish it is to elevate him over Christ. Church is not a popularity contest. What Christ did on the cross is much more important than what any human leader could do or say. Paul continues this gospel theme of the cross by saying to them, don't be so arrogant about what clique you're in and that you're cooler and wiser than everyone else. The ground around the cross is level. And God is not using you because you are so great. He uses you because He is great. So as a church, we are to preach Christ crucified and not to project ourselves as something that we are not. Paul reminds us, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. Because of the gospel, we are reminded to constantly show love and humility to our fellow believers in Christ and to a lost and hurting world. So, my challenge to you is to view your life every single day through the lens of the gospel. Have a great day in the Lord, Willowbrook.